dynamics regarding not just the negotiations, but then Fain's own relations with members. How do you see things playing out regarding Ford specifically?
Well, listen, this is a major escalation, as is publicly known. This is Ford's biggest plant, and it's one of the biggest plants in the U.S. So it clearly is an escalation here, and I think the UAW's calculus is, hey, we're gonna hit one of the crown jewels, if you will, of the Ford business. But I also think, Carl, this might be, we might be nearer to the end game here, because at the end of the day, I think, the UAW hitting this plant for Ford, I think, would demonstrate to his rank and file that he is pressing as hard as he can. And I think, importantly, when you think about how the UAW is thinking about this strike action versus the automakers, Ford, GM, and Stellantis, I think in looking at the business, the UAW is playing, if you will, checkers, and the automakers are playing chess. And what I mean by that is the UAW is just thinking one contract, which is about 4 years. Because, listen, they're elected officials. They have to get elected, another couple of years. So they have to show they're making ground. Whereas the automakers, they're thinking they're stewards of the business. So they have to think 5 to 10 years in advance in making sure that they're paying their employees fairly, but at the same time not saddling the companies with an uncompetitive position versus the non-union imports or Tesla or some of the new startups.
Right. We should point out that Fain has begun to speak, and we'll monitor that for some headlines, of course. Facebook Live is normal. That was one of the things, Mark, was that the action against the Kentucky plant happened without the sort of routine live stream that Fain has been doing, and that took a lot of the street by surprise.
Well, it falls into this strategy. As you know, Carl, there was a leak from, I think, the communications director where they wanted to, I think, quote unquote, they wanted to keep the D3 wounded for months, reputational damage, keep them in industrial chaos. And interestingly, they didn't deny that. But you got to think about that. Just kind of think about working with, the employers who employ your rank and file, and you want to damage them in that way. I think this falls within that, construct of keeping the automakers, kind of unbalanced. But kudos to the automakers and saying, hey, listen, we're going to fight fire with fire. We're going to be a lot more transparent in terms of what's on the table for the rank and file. And I think, to your point earlier, that's where it's going to make this getting to a tentative agreement and getting that ratified. We're in uncharted territory because it's been so transparent, and Fain has been so transparent in raising the expectations, if you will. It's going to be interesting to see whatever is agreed to, the ability to get that ratified.
Mark, hope you'll. I'm not sure if we're going to stick with you or say goodbye, but we do want to get to Phil LeBeau, who can tell us what Fain's been saying. Phil?
Well, he just began, Carl, and he said right off the bat that this is a new phase of the negotiation with the Detroit automakers, which requires a new approach. And then he went on to say, we will not be announcing new strike targets today. In the future, what will happen is what we saw on Wednesday with the announced strike at the Kentucky truck plant with Ford. Fain has said we will stand by, ready to announce further strikes as we deem necessary, depending on the state of negotiation. So there will be no new strikes announced today during this Facebook Live presentation, but we could see more down the road, like we saw on Wednesday with Ford. According to Shawn Fain, again, in his words, it all depends on the progress or lack of progress in the negotiations. Carl, I'll send it back to you.
All right, Mark Field's still with us. Thank you, Phil. Phil LeBeau. Mark, anything surprising there?
Well, no, it fits into that same kind of construct of, keeping the automakers on their toes. But I do think actually it's a good sign, right? Because at the end of the day, you have to think about within the strikes are only as good as the solidarity, if you will, of the workforce. And the longer they have these targeted walkouts where you have a certain portion of the rank and file of UAW not getting paid and just getting strike pay. And when you look at the transparency of what's been put on the table by the automakers, these offers that are put on the table, if you take them at face value, this would put the auto workers in the top 25% compensation of all workers in the U.S., whether it's hourly or salary. So for those that are on strike, they're going to start getting a little antsy, and it's going to make for some interesting conversations over the dinner table saying, why are we still out on strike when a bulk of the other UAW members are not? When are we going to get an offer?
So if you do really think this is nearing a tipping point, Mark, you mentioned what's at stake earlier in one of your answers that you kind of glossed over, but I want to highlight for the automakers and for the UAW, for that matter, which is a loss of competitiveness for GM, for Ford, for Stellantis, against not just the EV makers like Tesla, but the foreign OEMs as well. Do you think that's the end game here, no matter what happens, because of some of these demands and what they're talking about in terms of increases?
Well, I think at the end of the day, for the UAW, Sarah, as you know, their business model is all about membership and growing membership. And if you have a cost structure for the automakers that makes them less competitive over time, that's not going to be good for the UAW.
Right.
On the automaker side, they're looking at this business and they're saying we have a competitive wage gap now. By paying employees more, it's going to widen that. And listen, today they can manage that because of the mix of their business. They sell lots of trucks and SUVs. But I think, you have to look back. Whatever this contract is negotiated, the non-union imports, they're also going to have to raise their employees' wages. So, both these things will be moving at the same time. I think the real issue is around the competitiveness around EVs. And, if the automakers are forced into a very uncompetitive position, they're going to have to, they're going to think very seriously about resourcing these products to, places like Mexico to be competitive.
Mark, we'll see. No immediate expansion of the work stoppage. We'll watch the weekend, of course, to see what developments happen. We'll talk soon. Thanks. Mark Fields.
You bet.